The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the clink of Derek's lawyer adjusting his pen. He stood, looked straight at the judge, and said, "Your Honor, she's dangerous. She's emotionally unstable. Even her own sister has a restraining order against her." I stared ahead. My throat tightened, but I didn't flinch. His lawyer glanced at me, then smirked, like the damage was done, like I was already beaten. I didn't say a word, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew the truth had a way of showing up when you least expected it. And then, from the back of the courtroom, a woman's voice rang out, clear, steady. "Actually, I'm her sister, and I have something to say." Every head turned. Even the judge looked stunned. She stepped forward past the benches, past the attorneys, toward the front of the courtroom like she belonged there. It was Naomi, and in that moment, everything changed. "My name is Alina Kerr. I used to think I had a good sense for people. I work as a school counselor. I've spent years helping teenagers open up about things they thought they'd never say out loud. But somehow, I didn't see it in my own home. I didn't see who Derek really was until everything had already started to fall apart. We met at a university alumni event. He was magnetic, confident, and warm in that way that draws people in. Everyone liked him. I liked him. He made me laugh, asked thoughtful questions, and told me he admired how much I cared about my work. We talked for hours that first night. A year later, we were married. In the beginning, it felt like I had finally found someone who truly understood me. We bought a modest home in the suburbs. We had our son, Micah, 3 years into the marriage. Derek was charming and attentive. He brought me coffee every morning and made sure I had time for my hobbies. But slowly, things changed. He started making small criticisms. He'd correct how I spoke to Micah. He'd raise an eyebrow when I talked about my day, as if my problems were silly or exaggerated. He didn't yell, not then. He didn't slam doors or break things. Instead, he made me feel like I was overreacting, like I was sensitive and forgetful and not as smart as I thought. It was quiet manipulation, the kind that seeps in and makes you question whether you're the one doing something wrong. He began isolating me from the people who grounded me. He said my sister Naomi was a bad influence, that she liked to stir up drama and create problems between us. He told me she'd said terrible things behind my back. I believed him. He'd show me messages, out-of-context screenshots that made Naomi look cruel or jealous. I started pulling away from her. She tried to reach out, and I shut her down. I regret that more than anything. Micah was 5 when Derek really started to change. He wasn't just controlling anymore. He was cold. If I disagreed with him, he'd punish me with silence for days. If I cried, he'd call me dramatic. If I tried to set boundaries, he'd make threats. Not loud, obvious ones, but quiet suggestions of what he could take away. "You know, a court would never believe you," he'd say. "I'm stable. I have a good job. You cry over the dishwasher." By the time I realized what was happening, I felt completely alone. I didn't even recognize myself. I wasn't the strong woman I used to be. I was exhausted, unsure, and constantly apologizing for things I couldn't name. I left him after one night when Micah came into our room and asked, "Mommy, why is Daddy so mad at you all the time?" That was my breaking point. I packed a bag while Derek was at work and took Micah to my parents' house. It was the first time I had done something without Derek's approval in years. I expected him to beg for us back, to try and explain things. Instead, he went straight to legal threats. He filed for divorce and petitioned for full custody. In his statements, he painted me as unstable, unreliable, and emotionally erratic. He claimed I was dangerous around Micah. He said I had outbursts and that I had alienated myself from my own family, including my sister, who, according to his lawyer, had filed a restraining order against me. That was the first I had heard of it. I sat in court listening to his attorney list off lies, twisting every painful memory into a weapon. My attorney leaned in and whispered, "Do you want to respond to that about your sister?" I said no. I didn't want to fight fire with fire. I wanted facts. And the fact was, I hadn't spoken to Naomi in nearly 2 years. Not because I hated her, but because I was convinced she hated me. I had no idea she was even in the courtroom, no idea she'd been following the case or had something to say, but she was there. And when she stood up, everything I thought I understood about what was happening, everything Derek had tried to make the world believe, began to unravel. I had never been in a courtroom before the custody trial. I thought it would be more formal, more rigid. Instead, it felt like a theater where my life was being performed without my permission, and Derek was the one writing the script. He walked in that day looking polished, crisp suit, clean shave, calm expression. He even smiled at the bailiff. If you didn't know him, you'd think he was just a father trying to do what was best for his child. That's what he wanted the judge to believe. That's what he had worked so hard to build. A version of himself that looked credible and safe, and a version of me that didn't. His lawyer, a woman named Clarissa Wynn, had the kind of voice that made everything sound rational, even when she was twisting the truth. She stood confidently in front of the judge and began painting a picture I didn't recognize. She said I was emotionally unstable, that I had erratic behavior, and that I was incapable of making calm decisions in the interest of our son. She used words like impulsive, high-strung, and self-isolating. She said I had a pattern of pushing away the people closest to me and that this included my own family. Then came the moment that took the air out of the room. She turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, I'd also like to point out that Ms. Kerr's own sister has filed a restraining order against her. That should give the court serious pause about her emotional fitness to parent." I froze. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced. Was that true? Had Naomi really gone that far? I tried to remember the last words we exchanged. It was a tense conversation, angry even, but it wasn't violent. There had never been threats, no yelling, just a sad silence that stretched between us after too many misunderstandings and too much interference from Derek. I looked at my attorney. She whispered, "Do you want to respond?" I shook my head. I wasn't sure what was true anymore. I had spent so long in a fog of gaslighting that I didn't trust my own memories. If Naomi had filed something, wouldn't I have known? Wouldn't I have been served? Clarissa continued, calmly flipping through a folder. She didn't offer any proof. She didn't submit a document. Just the statement. Just the seed of doubt. That was Derek's strategy. He didn't need facts. He needed uncertainty. He needed the judge to look at me and wonder. I sat there quietly, hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my face neutral. I knew every expression I made would be watched. If I showed anger, it would confirm their story. If I cried, it would be seen as weakness. So I stared straight ahead. I kept my breathing steady and tried to block out the sting behind my eyes. Derek watched me the entire time. He didn't flinch when his lawyer lied. He didn't object or correct the statement. He wanted it out there. He wanted the courtroom to believe I had burned every bridge, even the ones he set fire to himself. Naomi had been the last connection I had to the version of me that existed before him. And even though we hadn't spoken in so long, part of me still hoped that if I ever needed her, she'd show up. But as the minutes passed and she didn't appear, I began to accept that maybe he had won. Maybe he had turned her too far against me. The judge asked Clarissa if she had any documentation of the restraining order. She responded carefully. "We are working on obtaining the file, but based on credible information from Mr. Kane, we're confident in the assertion." My attorney objected, stating that no such document had been received, and until it was produced, it shouldn't be considered. The judge nodded but made a note. And just like that, a lie had been spoken into the record. I kept thinking about Micah, about what he would think if he were old enough to understand what was happening. I wondered what he'd remember. Would he remember how hard I tried to keep things gentle and safe? Or would he grow up believing I was the version of me his father had created? I sat in that courtroom, surrounded by strangers deciding my future, and I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. Until I heard the voice. "Actually, I'm her sister, and I have something to say." The moment Naomi's voice rang out across the courtroom, it was like time cracked open. I hadn't heard her speak in 2 years, and yet I recognized her tone immediately, confident but trembling beneath it. The courtroom shifted, heads turned. The judge raised her eyebrows and leaned slightly forward. "Excuse me," the judge said. "Who are you?" Naomi stepped out from the back row. She wasn't dressed like someone who came to sit quietly. She wore a tailored navy blazer, her hair pulled back. She looked strong. "I'm Naomi Kerr. I'm Alina's sister." Clarissa Wynne looked up, startled. She whispered something to Derek, who instantly tensed. "I'm not on the witness list," Naomi said, "but I believe I need to correct the record." The judge looked to the bailiff. "Escort her forward." Naomi walked past the rows of seats and up to the front with a composure that made it feel like she belonged there. My heart pounded. I didn't know why she was there. I didn't know if she had come to help me or help him. I hadn't spoken to her since the week Derek accused me of being emotionally abusive and forwarded her private texts to me. She never replied when I tried to reach out afterward. I thought she was gone for good. Naomi turned to the judge. "There is no restraining order. I have never filed one against my sister. That is a lie." Clarissa stood quickly. "Your Honor, we were under the impression—" The judge held up her hand. "Let her speak." Naomi looked at me, her eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years, grief, maybe, or regret. 2 years ago, I stopped speaking to my sister. I believed things about her that I shouldn't have. I believed things because someone I trusted showed me messages, screenshots, and half-truths that painted her as manipulative. I see now that I was being used. The courtroom had fallen silent. Derek sat frozen, his expression unreadable. He didn't interrupt, but I could see his jaw tighten. Naomi went on. "Derek told me she was unstable, that she was harming Micah emotionally. He said she was isolating herself on purpose and that she was paranoid. He said all she did was tear people down." She paused. "I believed him because he was calm and convincing, because he always had a version of the story that made sense, and I didn't realize I was just one more person he needed to isolate her from." The judge leaned back in her chair, listening intently. "I didn't file a restraining order," Naomi said again firmly. "I would never do that. I cut contact because I was manipulated into thinking it was best for her. I was wrong." I felt my hands trembling. I hadn't realized how tightly I had been gripping the arms of the chair. I could hardly breathe. For months, I had been carrying the shame of being rejected by the one person who knew me better than anyone else. And now, she was standing here, telling the truth, publicly, clearly. Naomi turned to face me fully. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have called. I should have asked you directly. I'm here now, and I want to help fix what I broke." The judge looked at Clarissa. "Counsel, would you like to explain why you submitted a claim without documentation?" Clarissa, ever composed, replied, "We relied on testimony from Mr. Kane, and we're in the process of verifying." "That will not be sufficient going forward," the judge interrupted. "False claims are taken seriously in my courtroom." Derek's face lost its usual composure. He glanced toward Naomi with a flash of something I hadn't seen before. Panic. I realized in that moment how much of his power relied on silence, on isolation, and Naomi had just shattered it in front of everyone. The judge addressed Naomi again. "Do you have anything else to add?" She nodded. "Just one thing. I want to go on record. I trust my sister. I believe she is a good mother, and I regret ever making her feel otherwise." For the first time in that entire trial, I felt seen, not just defended, but truly understood. The truth had stepped into the room in the form of the person who once walked away from me, and she had chosen to come back. The moment Naomi stood up, everything began to shift, not just in the courtroom, but inside me. I had been quiet. I had chosen not to defend myself that day because I didn't want to play the game Derek was playing. I had chosen stillness instead of desperation, and Naomi filled the silence with truth. That was the moment I stopped feeling powerless. The judge sat quietly for a moment after Naomi finished speaking. She looked down at her notes, then up at Derek. Her voice was calm, but firmer than before. "Mr. Kane, did you personally tell your legal team that your ex-wife's sister had filed a restraining order?" Derek's composure cracked. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat, and tried to answer smoothly. "That was my understanding at the time." "Was it a misunderstanding?" the judge asked, "or a deliberate misrepresentation?" He didn't respond. "I'm going to ask one more time," the judge said, her tone sharp. "Did you knowingly tell your legal team something false in an attempt to damage Ms. Kerr's credibility in a custody hearing?" He glanced at Clarissa. She gave him nothing. Derek exhaled through his nose, clearly trying to recalibrate. I was under the impression that Naomi had taken legal action in the past. I didn't mean to mislead the court. Naomi stepped forward again. Your Honor, I'd like to clarify something. Derek sent me emails during the early stages of the custody case. He hinted that if I didn't back up his claims, he would bring up private things about me and my partner. He wanted to control the narrative. When I didn't comply, he stopped contacting me. The courtroom seemed to shrink in that moment. The air grew thick with tension. For the first time, the spotlight was no longer on me. It was on him. My attorney rose. We would like to request that all prior claims made by Mr. Kane and his legal counsel be re-evaluated for accuracy and intent. The judge nodded. I will be issuing a formal inquiry into the statements submitted under Mr. Kane's name. Furthermore, we will proceed with testimony under the assumption that Ms. Kerr's credibility has been unfairly attacked without valid evidence. Derek didn't speak again for the rest of the hearing. He didn't need to. The damage had already been done, by him, to himself. When the judge called for a recess, I sat in my chair for a few seconds longer than necessary. I needed that pause. I needed to feel what was happening. Naomi came to my side and knelt beside me. I wanted to come sooner, she said. I didn't know how to fix it. I let him turn me into a weapon, and I hate that I let that happen. I nodded, tears forming but not falling. Thank you for being here. I won't disappear again, she said. You're not alone anymore. Later, when the court resumed, the judge addressed both sides with final remarks before issuing a temporary custody ruling. This court finds no basis to remove shared parental rights from Ms. Kerr. At this time, custody will remain joint, with a third-party evaluator to monitor all exchanges between Mr. Kane and his son for the next 90 days. Final custody will be determined after full psychological and character evaluations are completed. I couldn't believe it. After months of fear, false accusations, and the slow unraveling of my confidence, I had been heard. The judge had seen through him. As I gathered my things, Micah's drawing slipped out of my folder, a little sketch he'd made of the three of us, me, him, and a small dog he hoped to get someday. I picked it up and held it in my hand, my heart steady for the first time in what felt like forever. Derek walked past me without making eye contact. For once, he didn't have a smirk, didn't try to say something subtle to undermine me. He just left. Naomi waited at the exit. When we stepped outside into the sunlight, she walked beside me, silent but present. That meant everything. In the courtroom, it had been my name on the documents, my reputation on the line. But it wasn't just my story. It was every woman who has ever been told she's too emotional. Every mother who's been accused of being unstable because she stood up to control. Every sister who didn't know she was being played until it was almost too late. Naomi's voice changed everything that day. She turned the tide not just in the courtroom, but in my heart. The version of me that Derek tried to erase stood up again, stronger, clearer, and no longer alone. After the hearing, I didn't cry right away. I thought I would, but I didn't. I think I was still holding my breath, waiting for something to go wrong, waiting for someone to tell me the relief I felt wasn't real, but it was. That night, I sat on the floor of Micah's room while he played with his toy cars. He lined them up on the rug like a little parade and asked if I would help him build a garage. I did. We didn't talk about court or his dad or anything heavy. We just played. And in the middle of it, he looked up at me and said, "You seem happy again." That sentence broke me. I held on to him tightly, whispering thank you over and over. He didn't know what he was thanking me for, but he hugged me back without hesitation. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild not just my custody case, but my sense of self. I joined a support group for women who had gone through emotional abuse during custody battles. I started seeing a therapist regularly. I began sleeping through the night again. Naomi and I met for coffee the next week. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of silence at first, a lot of painful honesty between sips of coffee and deep breaths. She told me how sorry she was for not asking questions, for assuming that Derek's version of me was true. I told her I wasn't proud of how I had shut her out, how I had ignored my own instincts in favor of his influence. We didn't try to pretend everything was perfect. We didn't call ourselves healed or whole, but we decided we were worth the effort. Sisters, even when the world tries to pull them apart, can still find their way back to each other. The custody case continued for a few more months. The judge's request for a psychological evaluation revealed clear patterns of controlling behavior in Derek. The evaluator's report confirmed what I had lived through. Slowly, piece by piece, the truth built its own record. Not just my words, but evidence. Eventually, I was awarded primary custody of Micah. Derek was granted supervised visitation, along with a court-ordered parenting class and mandatory counseling. I didn't feel triumphant. This wasn't about revenge or winning. It was about creating a life where my son could feel safe, where I could parent without fear, and where I could breathe without walking on eggshells. If you had told me a year earlier that I would be standing in court, accused of being dangerous by the person who once promised to love me, I wouldn't have believed you. If you had told me my sister would be the one to pull the truth into the light, I might have laughed bitterly. But life surprises you in the moments you least expect. Here's what I've learned. Silence is not weakness. Choosing not to defend yourself in the moment doesn't mean you're surrendering. Sometimes it means you're waiting for the truth to walk in, beside you. I didn't win that day in court because I shouted louder or fought harder. I won because I stood in who I was. I waited. I trusted that the lies would collapse under their own weight, and they did. If you're watching this and someone has tried to make you feel small, unworthy, or like your voice doesn't matter, I want you to know something. The truth does not need permission to be spoken. It only needs a moment. Sometimes that moment comes from someone else. Sometimes it comes from inside you, but it will come. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. I'm raising my son with peace in our home. I'm rebuilding a relationship with the sister I thought I had lost. And I'm remembering who I was before someone tried to convince me I was someone else. That courtroom tried to decide who I was. But in the end, I decided for myself. Thank you for watching my story. If it spoke to you, if you've ever felt unheard, misjudged, or like someone tried to rewrite your truth, I want you to know you're not alone. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And sometimes, the moment you choose to stay quiet is the most powerful thing you can do. If this video moved you, please like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your story, your thoughts, or even just a simple, "I'm still standing." Because that alone is enough. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more real stories about strength, healing, and rising again, because there's more to come. Take care of yourself. And remember, your truth has value, even when someone tries to silence it.